Hi, and welcome back to The Journey. The goal of this material is to bring you your greatest joy while bringing God His greatest glory. Many people are helping me in getting material for this journey, and I'm very thankful. One such man is Dickie Love. Dickie gave me a ton of PowerPoint slides that had lessons on them that he has taught from. Some of them are excellent, so I am going to be using them. Here is one of those lessons. He starts off by saying these words. I was reading through a pile of old, outdated magazines and pulling stuff out of them that I found interesting. One of the things that surprised me was tied to how dated they were. Many of you know how Time magazine has issues in the very back with a section called the Winners and Losers, where they make some cute little commentary on 2 or 3 people who they believe won or lost that month. 2 of them struck me as more than a little odd, given the events of the fall of the year 2001. In the loser category in the August of 2001 issue was one Rudy Giuliani, lame duck New York City mayor with a crumbling health, a crumbling marriage, and a crumbling political career. What a loser. A month or 2 earlier before that issue in the winner category was Ted Olson, rising star in the legal world, easing through the confirmation process as Solicitor General, the legal mind who represents the United States interests in the Supreme Court. What a winner. But what happened? The events of 9/11. Within a matter of weeks of these 2 Time magazine picks, Giuliani is being called by Time magazine as the mayor of the world, while Ted Olson is trying to put his life back together after losing his much-loved wife Barbara, who was on Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. The difference? Just a little time. When I read that story, I knew how it applied. Just give this life a little time, 80 years or so, and then eternity will come and we'll find out that everything is different. Those who we thought were winners might end up being losers. And those who we thought were losers were probably really winners. In our last session, we talked about living for eternal rewards and not temporal rewards. This is not simply a good idea. These are Jesus' words and commands. But there is something we need to note. It is not only about rewards that we should live for in light of eternity. There is something even greater than that.
Some people say life begins at conception. Others say life begins when you are born. Others say life begins when you are born again. Yet others say life begins when you're 40. At Unveiling Glory, we agree with them all, but we add one more idea to it. We believe life truly begins when you die. It is only when you pass from this life into the next that the true purpose you were created for gets underway.
In order to have a good foundation, we need to discover the true purpose as to why we were really created. The key word here is true. Think about it. Do you think these 80 or so years are what we were really created for? I hope not. Even looking at the yarn, it would be ridiculous to live for the knot. And that represented over 9.6 million years. And the entire skein is nothing compared to eternity. So if we were created primarily for these 80 or so years, doesn't that seem like poor time management compared to eternity? You create something to be used for 80 years and then put it on the shelf or into retirement for eternity? Its purpose is done with? I don't think so. Every human institution would consider that poor time management. Does God have poor time management? No. God does not have poor time management. God did not primarily create us for these 80 or so years. These are merely the tryouts or the preseason games. Here is the fifth lesson we must learn in laying a good foundation. It is key. It is critical. Don't miss it. Here it is. Life doesn't begin until we die. Let me repeat that. Life does not begin until we die. The real reason we were created doesn't begin until we go to be with the Lord. Then we're at the very beginning of why we were created. Our time here on this earth are the times when we learn not only to trust Jesus as our Savior, but to learn to walk with Him and depend upon Him and prepare ourselves for eternity. These years on earth are just the tryouts and the preseason. If you've come to know Jesus, you're on the team. You've made the team. Now you need to prepare for the season that will eventually come. These are only the preseason games. The season starts, life starts after we die. So what will we be doing when life begins? What will we be doing for all eternity? The Scriptures only give us hints. Let's look at those hints. First, we will be co-heirs with Jesus. Look at Romans chapter 8, verse 17. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God, and co-heirs with Christ. We are co-heirs with Christ. What Christ inherits, we will inherit with Him for all eternity. What does He inherit? The writer of Hebrews speaks directly to that in the second verse of the first chapter. He says these words, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, He spoke to us by His Son, whom He appointed heir of all things, through whom He made the universe. Christ inherits everything, and we will be a co-heir with Him. What will we be doing as His co-heir? The Scriptures aren't clear. But somehow we are going to be managing, if that's the right word to use, everything together with Jesus as a co-heir, as His bride. If managing is the right word, we'd better be good managers and have great wisdom. Along with managing, the Bible gives us another little hint as to what we will be doing. Paul speaks about it to the Corinthians in his first letter when he is seeing believers go to court against each other. In chapter 6, verse 3, he says these words, "Don't you realize that someday we believers will judge the world? And since you are going to judge the world, can't you decide even these little things among yourselves? Don't you realize that we will judge angels?" Oh, are you aware that we are going to be judging angels? What does that specifically mean? I have no idea. But I do know it doesn't mean nothing. It does mean something. We are going to be judging the world as well as angels. On top of that, managing God's entire kingdom, not individually, but corporately as the bride of Christ, as His co-heir. If that is the case, where will we be getting all of this wisdom to manage God's kingdom, to rule over angels, over the world as co-heirs with Christ? Well, in God's Word, as we study it these 80 or so years. What we learn here will be applied to all of eternity. This is why these 80 or so years are considered the preseason games. The Scriptures point us in this direction. Look at Matthew chapter 25 and the parable of the talents. Jesus teaches us this. In this parable, 3 servants or slaves, depending upon your translation, were each given talents when the king went away. One servant was given 5 talents, one was given 2 talents, and one was given 1 talent. When he comes back, the king, he settles with the servants. Let's pick it up in verse 19. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. These words, after a long time, indicate the amount of time that we are here on this earth. Life on this earth seems like a long time, but judgment time will come, and we will need to reconcile with the king. Pick it up in verse 20. The one who had received the 5 talents came up and brought 5 more talents, saying, Master, you entrusted 5 talents to me. See, I have gained 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Enter into the joy of your master. What a wonderful description of heaven. Being in the joy of our master. He is talking about beginning eternity with God. Notice how he handled the 5 talents, determined how many talents he would have eternally and what he would be in charge of. The wisdom we learn here on this earth will be used eternally as we fulfill our role as a part of the bride of Christ. Let's look at the next verse. Also, the one who had received the 2 talents came up and said, Master, you entrusted 2 talents to me. See, I have gained 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. He had 2. He will be put in charge of many things. That's when his purpose really begins. He will be in the presence of the joy of his master as co-heirs with Christ, inheriting the entire kingdom, managing the entire kingdom. The 5 and the 2 talents were merely tests for the king's real purpose. The king wanted to see, could they handle things well? If so, he'll put them in charge of many things, far more precious, far more valuable for all eternity. And what about the one who only had 1 talent? The king was angry at the one who didn't do anything with his talents. He wasn't preparing for eternity. He was living for the not. He wasn't living for eternity. What do we learn from this parable? We are to live for eternity. And how we use our lives here on this earth will determine what kind of purpose and rewards we will have for all eternity. Therefore, we need to be faithful with the gifts we have been given because they are preparing us for eternity. If you are faithful in the little things, you will be faithful in the big things. Now, there is another parable which seems like the one we just went over, but it is different. In Luke chapter 19, starting off at verse 11, Jesus speaks of talents being given out again. This time there are 10 servants or slaves, depending upon your translation, and there are 10 minas. So each servant was given 1 mina. 10 servants, 10 minas, each one got 1. They all started out with equal talents. Unlike the other parable, where one was given 5, one was given 2, and one was given 1. Now, each mina was worth about 3 months' wages back in those days, so it was a fairly considerable amount of money. Then a man of noble birth, as the text says, goes off to a distant land to be appointed king and then returns to reconcile. Returning again, It sounds like Jesus' second coming back to judge. It sounds like this reconciliation is the judgment day. There we will determine what will be happening for all of eternity. Note what happens. Let's pick it up in verse 16. The first servant reported, "Master, I have invested your money and made 10 times the original amount." "Well done," the king exclaimed. "You are a good servant. You have been faithful with the little I entrusted to you. So you will be governor of 10 cities as your reward." Again, note how he used his mina determined what he would be doing for all eternity, how he would be ruling and reigning. Verse 18. The next servant reported, "Master, I've invested your money and made 5 times the original amount." "Well done," the king said. "You will be governor over 5 cities." Again, he was faithful with a little. He was given much for eternity. Verse 20. But the third servant brought back only the original amount of money and said, "Master, I hid your money and kept it safe. I was afraid because you are a hard man to deal with, taking what isn't yours and harvesting crops you didn't plant." "You wicked servant," the king roared. "Your own words condemn you. If you knew that I'm a hard man who takes what isn't mine and harvests crops I didn't plant, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it." Then, turning to the other standing nearby, the king ordered, "Take the money from this servant and give it to the one who has 10 pounds. Okay, did you see what happened? Let's focus on what God did with that one mina that wasn't used wisely. He took the one and he gave it to the one who already had made 10 more. Why not give it to the one who had made 5? That would have seemed more equitable. No. He was trying to prove a point, and here it is. He rewards those who maximize the use of their gifts. God not only wants you to be faithful with the gifts He has given you, as we learned in the other parable, He wants you to maximize the use of those gifts. Why? We will be given a greater purpose once we get to heaven, to rule and to reign with Him as co-heirs over everything. Life doesn't begin until you die. Only then will we begin to realize the true purpose as to why we were created. How we live our life on this earth will determine how we rule and reign eternally. And this is what we were created for. Our greatest fear is that Christians will get to eternity and realize, oh my goodness, I was living for the wrong thing. I was living for myself. I thought life revolved around me, but I was wrong. It revolved around God. And I wasted so many gifts, so many talents, and so much time. So, what have we learned this far? In our first lecture, we learned that we have to lay a good foundation. If not, everything else is going to crumble. In our second lecture, we learned the simple truth that there is a throne and God sits on that throne. It is not figurative. It is not a good idea. It is real. It is more real than the screen you are watching this on. In our third lecture, we learned that not only is He on the throne, but everything revolves around Him. He is the center of the universe. Everything is from Him and through Him and to Him. Life is not about us. It is about God. In our fourth lecture, we discovered that we should live for rewards that will last eternally. God constantly tells us to live with an eternal perspective. Our lives are short here. We must live with eternity in mind. And lastly, we just learned that not only should we live for the rewards of eternity, eternity is really what life is all about. Life doesn't begin until we die. We need to be faithful with the gifts that we have been given and maximize the use of those gifts. Doing that will better prepare us to be co-heirs with Christ eternally. So, is your foundation laid correctly? Are you in the winner section of Time magazine only to find out that after you die you'll be in the losers section? Until you have a correct foundation, everything will begin to crumble in your Christianity. We don't want you using a frozen chicken when you should have been using a thawed chicken. We don't want you a few degrees off landing in Los Angeles when your destination was San Francisco. Once you get the right foundation, you will be living for eternity. And you'll be so much closer to giving God His greatest glory while gaining the greatest joy. Thanks for taking another step in the journey.